What's up everybody, Nate here, and work in our labor market has dramatically changed over the last couple of years. At the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020, we had extremely low unemployment, and then just a few months later, because of the pandemic, unemployment seemingly went all the way back up, and now in 2022, unemployment is at a record low. Between that time though, we had things like the Great Resignation, the anti-work movement, and now we have a new cultural phenomenon known as quiet quitting. Now, what you need to know about quiet quitting is it's essentially a labor movement within the workforce to basically give the bare minimum. Basically, people are no longer going above and beyond at their jobs. They are working the basic 9 to 5 and they're giving the bare minimum until 5 o'clock, and then they're punching out. They're not answering calls after work. They're not going above and beyond because they feel like they don't need to, and why should they? And not only that, when they decide to quit that job, well, they are no longer giving their 2 weeks notice. They are just flat out quitting. No notice, no nothing. So today I want to give my thoughts on quiet quitting, and I want to talk about how we got here from the Great Resignation and all of our other labor issues, and I want to talk about where we could potentially be going next. All right, so the first thing you need to understand about quiet quitting is that it is nothing new in our society. This is something that I believe has been going on for the last 20 or even 30 years or so. The term quiet quitting basically means that the workforce is completely quiet. They are essentially going to their jobs, they're putting their head down, and they're not working. And this is primarily the millennial generation and Gen Z. But like I said, this is really nothing new. The idea of doing the bare minimum at your job, at least from a cultural standpoint, where a large group of people have been doing that, I think has been going on since probably the 90s and early 2000s. Nobody who is quote unquote quiet quitting is actually calling it that in 2022. This is a term that has been coined by boomers and Gen X to describe a culture of millennials and Gen Z and how they approach work in 2022. But like I said, I believe this has been going on for much longer than just the millennial and Gen Z generation. Particularly, Gen X, I think, started this idea of going to work and doing the bare minimum because they were the generation that taught the millennials the most about what they need to do in order to be successful. Now, I grew up around a lot of boomers and Gen Xers from family and friends, and basically the ideology that was taught to me, a millennial, is that you need to work hard and continue to work hard in everything that you do. So basically, any single thing that you do, whether it's school or whether it's your work, you have to put in 110% plus in order to be successful at that. There are no handouts. You have to do everything yourself, and everything is a competition. You have to beat everyone else around you in order to be successful. If you're not doing that, then you're going to fall behind. But I think the big issue with this, and when it started to become more prominent in US culture, is when millennials really started to join the workforce during the mid 2000s. They were starting to get jobs and they were going to work for, well, around $7 an hour. My first job that I ever got nearly 10 years ago, well, I only ended up making around, well, $7.50 an hour. Now, obviously, this was an entry-level job. I worked at a little deli that was around the corner from my house, and, well, there wasn't really a lot of hours, there wasn't really a lot of pay, and it was a really low-stress job. But in that job, I treated it like it was going to be my career, right? So I did everything right. I ended up actually becoming, quote-unquote, like a manager there, even though they never wanted to give me the status because that involved a pay raise. But I was doing everything right. I was working overtime. I was training other employees, and nearly 2 or 3 years after getting that job, well, I only ended up seeing around $1 raise in 3 years. This was just a small locally owned place, so maybe they didn't really have a lot of money. I mean, it was just a small grocery store, a small deli. I mean, they didn't really have that much money to give me $2, $3, $4, $5 raises, and pretty much everybody there wasn't really making that much money, but the people around me were making the exact same amount that I was, even though I felt like I was working a lot harder than them. I would come in, I wasn't late, and still we all made the exact same amount of money. That's really when I started to think about, well, I'm not really being rewarded for working a whole lot harder here, so then why exactly would I work harder? Now, millennials are just getting older and they're getting bigger and better jobs, but the ideology is exactly the same. They are working their butt off, or they have worked their butt off off in the past, and well, it's just not getting them anywhere. Gen X really started this because they started to work at jobs in the early 2000s and realized they're not getting anywhere at their employment. They put in all of this extra work, and maybe they even became a manager at this company and continue to get pay raise after pay raise, and still they are in massive debt. They still have all of these financial problems, and at the end of the day, they are no better off than if they worked just a lot less. Now, it's amplifying though, with people like Kevin O'Leary saying that if you're a quiet quitter, you are essentially a loser in this workforce, and there are a ton of other figures out there saying that if you don't go above and beyond, well, then you're not going to ever be successful. So now I kind of want to address how we got here. So in 2020, we obviously had the pandemic. This was the biggest parts of that, and during that time, there was big unemployment because of economic lockdowns. Millions of Americans were out of work, but because of things like stimulus checks and extended unemployment benefits, that meant that people didn't need to get another job, and well, they really couldn't because things were locked down anyway. This meant that millions of people were taking time for themselves, and they were starting to realize the value of their life. What kind of value do they want to bring? And a lot of them realized that this is not at a 9-to-5 job. The value that they want out of life does not come from work. This led to the Great Resignation because as people went back to work, they figured out they hated their job, or they hated their boss, or they hated their career, and they wanted to completely change it because that really didn't make them happy. They didn't really see any value in that. So they wanted to go somewhere else, or they just wanted to figure out a better place to get better pay. And more importantly, they want to be treated with value and respect as well, because a lot of these companies, well, what do they do when they have financial troubles? The first thing they do is cut people. And well, that might make a lot of financial sense, but people don't want to be seen as a number on a spreadsheet. They actually want to have value. They want to be a part of something that you can't just cut away. So people were shifting around our entire workforce. They were going to different businesses for better pay, better work-life balance, better benefits, any and everything that they wanted, they were essentially getting, because businesses now had to adapt in order to meet our supply and demand issues. And they had to continue to, well, produce more so that way they could make a profit. Now, this was an interesting financial time for our entire country because we had things like stimulus checks, unemployment benefits, and all of this money from the Federal Reserve. There was a lot of money for these businesses to go out and spend. So yeah, they overhired people, and they hired pretty much anybody they wanted at whatever salary that those prospective employees wanted as well. So people were making all of this money. They were getting all of these benefits, working from home, working whenever they wanted to, etc. But in 2022, all of that seems to be shifting, and our labor market is beginning to tighten because of Federal Reserve interest rates and inflation. People are not spending as much money because inflation is so high and things are so expensive. That means businesses aren't getting the sales that they need in order to operate. But normally that's okay because businesses get a lot of investor liquidity. Investors take all of their money and pour it into businesses, so that way these businesses can continue to expand and they don't exclusively have to rely on sales. But in 2022, they're not getting those either. Debt is really expensive to take on because the Federal Reserve is raising its interest rates, meaning that the money that investors would get from banks, well, banks are raising their interest rates because it's a lot harder for the bank to get its money from the United States. This has caused a lot of layoffs and unemployment and job postings to fall all throughout the country. So that means our labor market is beginning to tighten, and the Great Resignation is pretty much over because Americans are realizing they can't just job hop anymore. They have to stay where they are, but they're okay with the pay as long as they're able to keep their job. Well, then they're doing all right in this economy. But now they are going into quiet quitting. They're not going above and beyond. They simply just want to work and use that money to do whatever they want. They don't want to get promotions. They don't want to go out and try to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week anymore because that really doesn't do anything for them. Now, this is where I think the big disconnect between boomers and Gen Z is, because boomers, well, they're part of a generation that did a lot of things for the United States, and there was only jobs that you could physically work hard at during that time. I mean, yes, there were other types of business jobs out there, but the vast majority of Americans were simply working hard in order to do a task. So there really wasn't a lot of other ways to build wealth or gain money. You had active income. That's all you had. You had had to go to work and you had to continue to do better at your job in order to get pay raises and promotions. And once you got that, then you could ultimately become more successful in your financial life. But in 2022, things are a little bit different because the jobs that we have today, well, they're a lot different than what they were in the 1950s and 60s. I've talked a lot about this on this channel before, but work is a completely relative term. It's completely intangible, right? Somebody working 10 hours a day in the hot sun at a construction job, they might not see somebody working in an office doing a sales call in, well, the air conditioning. That person to them might not be working hard at all. But again, this is all completely relative, right? Because that one sales call, that one salesperson, well, they may be making a multi-million-dollar deal, and the skills that they've gathered in order to make that deal, they've probably learned over 10, 20, and 30 years. Now, I'm not saying the construction worker doesn't work as hard, but it's completely different. They also have a lot of skills. In 2022, I think Gen Z and millennials are starting to realize that their number one goal in life is to not become a middle manager. They don't want to get promoted. They don't want to be a CEO. They just want to make enough money in order to enjoy themselves and to go out and do the things that they like. Basically, what this boils down to is a generation or two of people that feel like the entire workforce has betrayed them and slighted them because during the pandemic, there was essentially no work-life balance. The people who managed to stay employed during this time, well, they had a lot of boundaries that were not being met by their employers. They were basically working all of the time and they were almost expected to work a lot harder. Generations have gone through this, and it's not that they are lazy and that people don't want to work. I mean, of course, some people just don't want to work. They don't want to have to work in order to make money, but at the end of the day, most people do want to work, but they want to feel valued and they want to be compensated for working a whole lot harder. People don't want to give 110% anymore when a lot of businesses don't really seem like they're giving back to their employees. And I think right now a lot of millennials and Gen Z are going through a big soul-searching mission. I mean, a lot of people are going into jobs and they're working and they're realizing that they don't really like the career that they've chosen. This all stems from, well, our college crisis and student loan crisis, with people feeling like they have to go into a career in order to make a certain amount of money and then being really unhappy by that. But what I mean by soul searching is a lot of millennials and members of Gen Z need to realize why they are working in the first place and why they want to do anything. Like I said, it's not for a lack of working hard, because I think millennials and Gen Z are an extremely hard-working generation. They really want to do good in society and they want to be a valuable member of our country today, but they just don't want to be exploited. They don't want to have to work overtime and not get paid for it. They don't want to have to do a job that really should be done by a team of 5 people. So they are willing to work hard for certain things, and that's where I think we're headed in the future. You define success in your own life, and if you want financial success, well, that is something completely different than your own personal happiness. Financial success doesn't always come from your active income, and that means your job. The thing that you do 8 hours plus a day, that isn't always going to bring you the most financial success. We only have so much time, and if we're not working, then we're not making money. So working alone isn't going to bring you that success. Now, I think millennials and Gen Z understand this. They understand that you don't need to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week in order to be financially successful. You just need to make enough money and then start investing or have side hustles, or maybe you're an entrepreneur on the side and you have other means of income, things that you really enjoy doing. Those opportunities didn't exist 30, 40, and 50 years ago. The boomer generation had to go to work in order to get an income and to make more money. The only way they could do that was to get a promotion. So that makes sense with them saying that you have to continue to work harder, you have to continue to put in the extra hours, and everything is a competition. You have to beat the person next to you before they beat you. In 2022, it's simply not like that. There are so many different opportunities out there. There are so many different jobs, and well, if you get fired from one job, you could basically find that same job somewhere else in a different company. It's not really that special. That means money has completely changed, but what I want to address here is the idea of making yourself happy, and the idea that Gen Z and millennials, well, they will work hard at things that they want. They will work hard at their hobbies because those are the things that make them happy. But those things don't typically bring them a lot of financial success. And the fact of the matter is, you don't have to have financial success, right? Like, you don't have to be wealthy. It is all completely a choice. But at the same time, if you're not working really hard at your job and you have no investments, then you can't exactly expect to be financially successful. You can't lie to yourself either, right? You can't say that you want financial success, but you're not willing to put in the hard work and you're not willing to do any investing. Like I said, if you want to have a truly successful life, and that means financial success and complete happiness, you have to have both things in tandem. Millennials and Gen Z right now are focused on the right side. They're focused on being happy in their own life, and they're willing to give up a lot of the financial success in order to do that. And again, that is a complete choice, and I think it's something that's going to be more important going forward in the United States. But do your best not to conflate the two, because what brings you the most meaning and the most value out of life, well, that might not be financially motivated. Money is completely separate, and the way that we make money, well, that doesn't need to have any sort of emotional connection. And I think that's what a lot of businesses are getting wrong right now. They want all of their employees to be all in, and they want things to feel like a team, but they don't really want to do anything else. They just want to say those things and hope that they actually come true. That means that a lot of workers are going to their job and they're actually not getting a lot of meaning or value, or they don't really have a passion for the career that they're in. I think one day though, when millennials and Gen Z do finally figure out what brings them meaning, that will also bring them a lot of joy and a lot of money on the side. I think eventually, once they figure out what they're working towards, then they'll be able to start making a lot more money because of it. And then once you figure that out, work hard. And I know what you're thinking, that sounds completely ironic considering I just said working hard is not going to bring you financial success. But look, working hard is something that you need to do for the things that you want. I'm telling you that you need to work hard for all of the things that you want out of life. You definitely need to work hard for them, and you should want to, because nothing in life comes easy just in general. You have to be able to put in that extra effort if you want to get something, but make sure that you want to get that. If you're always chasing money, or you're always chasing better benefits or better pay or whatever it may be, I can almost guarantee you that the chase will always continue. You will never reach your goal because you will never have enough money. There's a lot of other things going on in your life, and you need to figure out what exactly you want out of life and how you can start to fund that and how you can actually get to that point. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think about quiet quitting? Do you think this is ruining the workforce as we know it, or do you think this is a natural progression of the way work should be in the United States? And at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself this: how important is money and your job to you? Because obviously your job isn't your entire life. There's a lot of other things that you need to be spending your time doing, and of course money isn't everything. We obviously need money, and money plays a role in our lives, but we don't need a whole bunch of it. But if your goal ultimately is to make more money, then the reality is that you need to work really hard. You need to go above and beyond, and at the end of the day, you have to work smart. If you have a problem with your employer, if you have a problem with your business feeling like they don't respect you and they're not paying you enough, then that is a separate issue. But again, you don't need a whole bunch of money, and if you are just happy doing your hobbies and doing the other things that you love and spending more time doing all of that than making money and progressing at your job, then that is something that you can ultimately do. At the end of the day, it's a choice. You're sacrificing one thing over another. You can't have both at the same time, and it's going to be a choice that you have to make. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think about quiet quitting? Do you think this is ruining the workforce as we know it, or do you think this is a natural progression of the way work should be in the United States? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter, and you can subscribe to it by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if you want to stay up to date with me and everything else happening in the business and financial world, I'm putting out updates 7 days a week over here on this channel, and I've actually got another one ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.